Do animals need protection? A horse story in the year of the horse, 2026. In 1866, New York City was loud, crowded, and dirty. Horses pulled carts, buses, and wagons all day long. People depended on them for work. But horses were not treated kindly. If a horse fell down from tiredness, drivers beat it. If the horse didn't stand up, they left it in the street and bought a new one. Horses were seen as tools, not living beings. There were no laws to protect animals. Hurting animals was legal. Many people believed, it's my property, I can do what I want. One gray afternoon, a horse collapsed in the mud. A driver lifted a heavy wooden club to beat it again. Then, something unexpected happened. A tall man in fine clothes stepped into the street. He wore a silk top hat and a long coat. He stood between the man and the horse. The driver laughed. Move! He thought, this is my horse. But the man didn't move. He opened his coat, showed a silver badge. Calmly, he said, the beating is over. His name was Henry Bergh. Henry Bergh was not rich. He did not need to work. He had traveled to Europe and met kings and queens. He could have lived an easy life. But one day, he saw a horse being beaten in the street. The cruelty shocked him. He began to believe something important. A good society protects the weak. Henry returned to New York with a goal. He wanted to stop cruelty to animals. People laughed at him. Newspapers made fun of him. Some called him foolish. But Henry did not stop. He worked with lawmakers and helped create the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Soon after, New York passed its first law against animal cruelty. Now, Henry went into the streets himself. He stopped overloaded carts. He rescued abused animals. He stood in traffic and forced people to walk so tired horses could rest. People shouted at him. Children threw food at him. Some threatened to hurt him. Henry stayed calm. He touched horses gently. He spoke firmly. He refused to move. Slowly, things changed. People began to think before raising a whip. They started to report cruelty. Some even called Henry the angel in the top hat. Henry Bergh died in 1888 during a great winter storm. He was 75 years old. By then, his idea had spread across America to other countries. Laws to protect animals and later children grew from his work. Today, animal shelters and animal protection laws exist because one man stepped in to the mud and said, "No more!" Okay, that was a level one. According to our work at our school, Okay, here's level 2. Do animals need protection? The wooden club rose above the fallen horse. Then a man in a silk top hat stepped into the mud and changed everything. The heavy wooden club paused for a second above the horse's spine, then came down with a sickening crack that echoed off the brick walls in 1866 New York. The horse collapsed into the mud. It was a common sight on the crowded streets. Drivers viewed their animals as machines, not living things. If a horse collapsed from exhaustion, you beat it until it stood up. If it didn't stand, you left it to die in the gutter and bought another one for $20. Animals had no rights. There were no laws against cruelty. You could burn a dog, starve a horse, or fight roosters for entertainment, all perfectly legal. It was considered a man's right to do what he wanted with his property. But on this gray afternoon, the club didn't swing a second time. A tall, thin man stepped directly into the mud between the driver and the dying horse. He was dressed in the finest clothes money could buy, a silk top hat, a long tailored coat, gloved hands. He looked like he belonged in a palace, not a filthy street corner. The driver was shocked. He looked at his fancy gentleman and laughed. "Step aside," he surely thought. "This is my property." But the gentleman didn't step aside. He pulled back his coat to reveal a silver badge pinned to his chest. His voice was low, calm, and terrifyingly serious. "The beating is over." The man was Henry Bergh, and he was about to start a war with the entire city of New York. Henry Bergh was not a likely hero for the voiceless. He was born into massive wealth. His father was a shipbuilder who left him a fortune. Henry spent his early years traveling Europe, attending parties, living the life of a gentleman. President Lincoln appointed him as a diplomat to Russia. Henry walked the halls of the Tsar's winter palace. He sat at tables with kings and queens. He could have lived a life of quiet luxury, ignoring the ugliness of the world. But while in St. Petersburg, he saw something that changed him. A carriage driver beating a fallen horse in the street. The cruelty of it struck him to his core. He realized that civilization was just about art and palaces. It wasn't just about art and palaces. It was about how the strong treated the weak. Henry resigned his diplomatic post and returned to New York with a singular mission. He was going to stop the cruelty. His friends laughed at him. "You can't change human nature, Henry." But Henry Bergh didn't care about human nature. He cared about the law. The problem was that the law didn't exist. So Henry Bergh decided to write it himself. He spent his nights drafting a declaration of animal rights. He used his wealth and connections to secure a meeting with the New York legislature. He stood before them and didn't ask for pity. He demanded justice. He argued that animals weren't just property, they were creatures capable of suffering, and a civilized society had a duty to protect them. On April 10th, 1866, the miracle happened. The legislature passed the charter incorporating ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Nine days later, they passed a law making animal cruelty a crime for the first time in New York history. Now, Henry had a piece of paper. He had to make it real. He didn't hire a team of enforcers at first. He went out into the streets himself. This is where the real struggle began. Henry Bergh became a patrolman of one. Walking the gritty, dangerous streets of Lower Manhattan, he watched for overloaded horse carts. He looked for the swill milk dairies where sick cows were kept in filth. He hunted for dogfights in back alleys. He was mocked relentlessly. Newspapers called him the Great Meddler. Cartoons depicted him as a fool. Children threw vegetables at him in the street. Drivers threatened to beat him the way they beat horses. But Henry Bergh had a secret weapon. He had no fear of embarrassment. He had no need for their approval. He would stand in the middle of traffic, raising his hand to stop a packed streetcar. "This horse is too weak to pull you," he would announce. "You must get out and walk." The passengers screamed insults. They cursed his name. Henry simply stood there, stroking the horse's nose, refusing to move until the animal was unhitched and fed. He took on the biggest name of the era. He went after P.T. Barnum, the famous showman who fed live animals to snakes for entertainment. Bergh marched in and threatened to shut down the show. Barnum was a master of publicity, and he tried to turn the public against Bergh, tried to make him look ridiculous. But Bergh didn't crack. He dragged Barnum to court and made the great showman answer for his actions. Even Barnum eventually admitted that Bergh was a man of noble heart. The work was exhausting. Henry Bergh was often alone, facing lawsuits from angry business owners, arguing before judges who thought he was silly. One night, he returned home, covered in mud and snow. He'd spent hours arguing with a butcher about the transport of sheep. They were tied with painful cords and stacked like firewood. Bergh had to cut the cords himself and had been threatened with a knife. He sat by his fire, his silver badge reflecting the light. He was tired, but he knew he was winning. The city was changing. People began to report cruelty instead of ignoring it. Drivers began to think twice before raising the whip. They looked over their shoulders, searching for the tall man in the silk hat, the angel in the top hat, some began to call him. His greatest victory wasn't a single arrest. It was a shift in the human heart. Before Bergh, a beaten horse was just a broken tool. After Bergh, a beaten horse was a victim deserving protection. He forced the entire society to look in the mirror and taught them that mercy was a sign of strength, not weakness. One cold evening, years after his crusade, Henry stopped a cart. The horse was a skeleton, shivering in the wind, struggling under the load of heavy stones, far too much for a starving animal. The driver climbed down, fists clenched, ready to fight. Then he saw the face of Henry Bergh, those sad, stern eyes. The driver stopped. He lowered his hands. He looked at the horse, really looked at it, perhaps for the first time. "I'm just trying to make a living," the driver muttered. "And he was just trying to live," Henry replied softly. Henry helped the man unhitch the horse. He didn't arrest him that day. He taught him. Henry died during the Great Blizzard of 1888 at age 75. By then, the ASPCA was a powerful force. His idea had spread to other states, then other nations. He also helped spark the child protection movement, because once you accept that the weak deserve protection, well, you protect them all. Today, animal shelters, humane societies, and laws that protect animals from cruelty trace back to one wealthy diplomat who could have lived a comfortable life, but chose the mud instead. Think about what Henry Bergh gave up. He had wealth, status, and connections to royalty. He could have spent his life at parties and palaces. Instead, he spent it standing between clubs and victims. He endured mockery, threats, and ridicule, all to protect creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. He proved that one voice, and steady and unafraid, can change the world. He had every reason to look away, but he didn't. In 1866, beating a horse to death in the street was legal. By 1888, it was a crime. Henry Bergh didn't wait. He didn't delegate. He slipped into the mud himself and said, "No more." All right. There's a YouTube video I think you'll find interesting. And here's Henry Bergh. Yeah. Any other languages here? Oh, there you go. Oh, Japanese? Oh my gosh. Here's the video I mentioned. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one. All right. Thank you, Henry.